June 1925. Deep inside the Amazon rainforest, a British explorer writes his final known message. He tells his wife not to fear failure, not to search for him, and not to send rescue parties. Then, Percy Fawcett disappears. No body, no campsite, no confirmed witnesses, only rumors of arrows, starvation, or a city older than history itself. This is the expedition that vanished while chasing a myth. This is the search for the lost city of Z. Percy Harrison Fawcett was not a man drawn to fantasy. Born in 1867 in Devon, England, he was raised in a world of discipline, imperial service, and Victorian confidence in order and progress. His father was a member of the Royal Geographical Society. His upbringing emphasized duty, endurance, and the belief that the unknown existed to be measured and mapped. Fawcett trained as an artillery officer in the British Army. He served in Ceylon, where he learned jungle survival, navigation under extreme conditions, and the psychological demands of long isolation. These experiences shaped him into a meticulous planner, calm, observant, and physically resilient. By the early 1900s, South America was one of the last regions of the world still poorly mapped by European powers. Borders between nations like Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru were undefined, and disputes were frequent. The Royal Geographical Society required experienced surveyors capable of working in hostile terrain, under political pressure, and far from supply lines. Fawcett volunteered. In 1906, he was commissioned to map the border between Brazil and Bolivia, a region dominated by dense rainforest, rivers without names, and indigenous groups largely uncontacted by outsiders. Unlike many explorers of his era, Fawcett showed unusual restraint toward native populations. He avoided violence whenever possible, recorded their customs carefully, and criticized explorers who provoked hostility through arrogance or cruelty. The Amazon, to him, was not a blank space. It was structured, it was inhabited, and he believed it had a past that Europeans did not yet understand. During these early expeditions, Fawcett began encountering fragments that did not fit prevailing assumptions, stone tools in areas believed never to have hosted large populations, earthworks visible along riverbanks, reports from indigenous guides of abandoned settlements deep within the forest, places avoided, remembered, or deliberately forgotten. At the time, mainstream archaeology insisted that the Amazon could not support advanced ancient civilizations. The soil was considered too poor, the environment too hostile. Any large society, it was believed, would collapse quickly under such conditions. Fawcett disagreed. In the archives of the Brazilian National Library, he encountered a document that would become central to his obsession, Manuscript 512. Written in the 18th century by Portuguese bandeirantes, it described the ruins of a vast stone city discovered deep in the interior, complete with roads, arches, statues, and inscriptions. Most scholars dismissed the manuscript as exaggeration or myth. Fawcett did not. He believed it described a real settlement, not a single city, but evidence of an ancient network of civilizations that had once thrived before being erased by disease, conquest, or environmental collapse. He named it simply Z, not as a place on a map, but as a hypothesis, a placeholder for something yet to be proven. Over the next decade, Fawcett returned to South America repeatedly. He endured starvation, disease, venomous animals, and isolation. On one expedition, his team was presumed dead after disappearing for months. When they re-emerged, skeletal and weakened, Fawcett gained a reputation for near mythical endurance. Yet his claims became increasingly controversial. He argued that ancient Amazonians practiced agriculture on a massive scale, that the rainforest was not purely natural, but engineered, that Europeans misunderstood the land because they arrived too late, after the civilizations had already fallen. These ideas challenged the foundations of Western archaeology. At home in England, Fawcett's credibility fractured. Some praised him as visionary, others labeled him reckless, delusional, or obsessed. His refusal to bring back physical proof, statues, inscriptions, artifacts, weakened his standing within academic circles. But the evidence he trusted most was not in museums, it was in the terrain itself. By the early 1920s, Fawcett believed he had narrowed the possible location of Z to the headwaters of the Xingu River in what is now the Brazilian state of Mato Grosso. Satellite imagery did not exist. Aerial surveys were limited. Everything depended on rivers, compasses, and human judgment. Fawcett was now in his late 50s. His health was failing. His finances were strained. His reputation hovered between respect and ridicule. And yet, he was convinced this would be his final expedition. In 1925, he assembled a small team. Unlike previous journeys, he deliberately reduced numbers. He believed large expeditions attracted hostility, moved too slowly, and depended on fragile supply chains. This time, there would be no porters, no armed escort, no scientific entourage, only 3 men: Percy Fawcett, his son Jack Jack Fawcett, 21 years old, strong, optimistic, and untested, and Jack's friend Raleigh Rimmel, loyal, inexperienced, and determined. Their supplies were minimal, their weapons limited. Their plan depended entirely on moving quietly, earning indigenous trust, and avoiding confrontation at all costs. Before departing, Fawcett wrote letters to his wife, Nina. In them, he warned her not to organize search efforts if he failed to return. He feared that rescue parties would provoke violence against local tribes or vanish in the same way. He believed that if Z existed, it would only reveal itself to those who approached without force. In April 1925, the expedition left Cuiabá, the last major settlement before the forest consumed all roads. They traveled by river, then by foot, then into regions no European could reliably map. Their last confirmed camp was called Dead Horse Camp, named after an earlier expedition loss. From there, they entered territory described only through rumor and indigenous memory. On May 29, 1925, Percy Fawcett sent his final letter. The tone was calm, confident, resolute. He believed they were close. After that, the Amazon went silent. The rainforest does not announce when it closes behind you. There's no clear boundary, no moment of transition. The trees simply grow denser, the paths narrower, the air heavier. Sound behaves differently, absorbed, redirected, swallowed. Distances distort. What appears close can take hours to reach. What seems familiar becomes unrecognizable within minutes. This was the environment Percy Fawcett entered in late May of 1925. After leaving Cuiabá, the expedition moved steadily northwest toward the upper Xingu Basin. At first, progress was manageable. Rivers offered natural corridors. Small settlements provided brief opportunities for resupply. Fawcett maintained strict discipline, minimal contact, fair trade, no threats, no displays of force. He believed that the jungle rewarded humility. The three men traveled light. Their supplies included dried food, tools, notebooks, cameras, a sextant, compasses, and gifts intended for indigenous groups: beads, mirrors, cloth, small metal items. Weapons were carried only for hunting, not defense. As they advanced, the terrain changed. Open forest gave way to tangled undergrowth. Rivers fractured into marshlands. Insects became relentless. Every cut risked infection. Every night brought dampness that seeped into clothing and bone. Jack Fawcett, young and physically capable, adapted quickly. He had trained with his father and shared his endurance. Raleigh Rimmel struggled more. The rainforest was unlike anything he had experienced, claustrophobic, disorienting, and psychologically exhausting. Still, the expedition pressed forward. Fawcett's journals from earlier expeditions described the jungle as alive with intention. He believed the forest was not random, that its apparent chaos concealed patterns shaped by human presence long ago. Raised mounds, straight causeways, clearings where the soil behaved differently. Signs, he thought, of something buried beneath centuries of growth. At Dead Horse Camp, the last confirmed waypoint, Fawcett made a critical decision. From here on, he would proceed without turning back. The camp had earned its name years earlier when an expedition animal collapsed and died there, a reminder of how thin the margin of error was. Beyond this point, no reliable maps existed. The region was marked on British charts with a simple notation: unexplored. From Dead Horse Camp, the men moved eastward, then northeast, following a route Fawcett believed would lead them to the periphery of Z. They were now fully dependent on local knowledge. Encounters with indigenous groups became more frequent. Some were cautious but receptive. Others were distant, watchful, or openly hostile. Fawcett followed his long-standing rule: never pursue contact if it was not offered. In one encounter, an indigenous guide reportedly warned them against continuing, describing hostile tribes farther ahead, known to kill intruders. Fawcett acknowledged the warning but pressed on. He believed danger was unavoidable. The last message ever received from Percy Fawcett was sent on May 29, 1925. It was addressed to his wife, Nina. In it, he wrote calmly of their progress. He reassured her of their safety. And then, with deliberate clarity, he repeated a request he had made before: do not send rescue parties. He feared that outsiders entering the region in force would provoke violence and cause more deaths. He accepted the risk of disappearance as part of the mission. After that letter, there is nothing. No journal entries recovered, no photographs, no verified sightings. The expedition vanished without leaving a trace that could be confirmed beyond doubt. Weeks passed, then months. At first, silence was not alarming. Expeditions often returned late. Communication delays were expected, but as time stretched on, concern hardened into dread. By late 1926, it was clear that something had gone wrong. Rumors began to circulate. Some claimed the men were killed by the Kalapalo tribe. Others said they died of disease or starvation. A few insisted they had survived, that Fawcett had chosen to remain among indigenous peoples, protecting the secret of Z. None of these stories could be verified. The British and Brazilian governments hesitated. The region was vast, the risks were extreme. Fawcett's explicit instructions complicated matters further, but public fascination grew. Newspapers sensationalized the disappearance. Explorers, adventurers, and fortune seekers became obsessed with solving the mystery. Over the next decades, more than a dozen expeditions would enter the Amazon searching for Fawcett. Many never returned. Some search parties found abandoned campsites, but none conclusively linked to Fawcett. Others brought back conflicting testimonies from indigenous informants, often filtered through translators, misinterpretations, or the expectations of those asking the questions. One searcher claimed to have found bones believed to belong to Fawcett. Tests later disproved this. Another expedition retrieved a signet ring engraved with Fawcett's initials. Its authenticity was never confirmed. Some reported villages where elders spoke of white men who passed through long ago, accompanied by a younger relative and a companion. In some versions, they were killed after violating tribal customs. In others, they died of illness. In still others, they were absorbed into the tribe and never left. Each account contradicted the last. The jungle, it seemed, was offering no answers, only echoes. The most widely accepted theory suggests the expedition encountered hostile territory shortly after their final letter. Isolated, low on supplies, and unable to retreat, they may have been killed within days or weeks. Another theory proposes a slower end, starvation. The rainforest, despite its abundance, is unforgiving to those unfamiliar with its rules. Protein scarcity, poisonous plants, and misjudged hunting can quickly turn fatal. A third theory, less accepted but persistent, claims survival. That Fawcett, convinced he had found traces of Z, chose to remain behind, abandoning the outside world entirely. Supporters point to his growing disillusionment with Western society, and his belief that indigenous cultures possessed knowledge long lost to Europe. But no physical evidence has ever supported this claim. What complicates the mystery further is what modern science has revealed since Fawcett's disappearance. In recent decades, satellite imagery and archaeological surveys have uncovered extensive earthworks across the Amazon basin. Geoglyphs, raised fields, engineered soils known as terra preta. These discoveries confirm that large, complex societies once existed where Europeans believed none could. In this sense, Fawcett was not wrong. The Amazon had been shaped by humans long before European arrival. But whether Z was a single city, a network of settlements, or an idea assembled from fragments remains unresolved. Percy Fawcett disappeared chasing a truth that science would only begin to confirm long after he was gone. No grave marks his end, no final photograph survives, no artifact definitively closes the case. The rainforest reclaimed everything, and perhaps that was inevitable, because some expeditions do not fail loudly. They do not collapse in storms or sink beneath ice. They simply walk forward and are never seen again. Percy Fawcett did not vanish alone. In the years following his disappearance, the Amazon became a magnet for those determined to solve the mystery he left behind. Explorers, journalists, fortune hunters, and amateur adventurers entered the forest convinced they would succeed where Fawcett had failed. Many underestimated the terrain. Some underestimated the people who lived there. Others underestimated the silence. Between the late 1920s and the 1950s, more than a dozen documented search expeditions attempted to retrace Fawcett's final route or uncover evidence of his fate. Several ended in injury, psychological breakdown, or death. A few vanished entirely. The irony was unmistakable. The search for a lost explorer became one of the deadliest chapters in the story itself. Unlike Fawcett, many searchers traveled with large groups, weapons, and rigid expectations. Their presence disrupted local communities and increased hostility. In some cases, tribes that had previously avoided contact became defensive, not because of Fawcett, but because of those who came after him. The mystery deepened rather than resolved. Each expedition returned with fragments, a story overheard, an object found, a trail that ended abruptly. None could be conclusively linked to Percy Fawcett, Jack, or Raleigh Rimmel. Bones recovered from the forest were later identified as belonging to others. Artifacts failed authentication. Testimonies conflicted. By the mid-20th century, official interest waned. Governments quietly abandoned large-scale searches. Academic institutions distanced themselves from the case. What remained was legend, and legend is difficult to verify but impossible to erase. Fawcett himself became a divided figure. To some, he was reckless, a man who endangered his son in pursuit of an unprovable idea. To others, he was ahead of his time, dismissed by institutions unwilling to reconsider their assumptions about the Amazon. For decades, archaeology favored the skeptics. Then, the evidence began to change. Advances in satellite imaging, LiDAR scanning, and soil analysis revealed patterns invisible from the ground. Vast geometric earthworks emerged beneath the canopy. Raised causeways, agricultural systems, and large settlements appeared where none were believed possible. These discoveries did not not confirm the existence of a single lost city of Z, but they confirm something more important. Fawcett's core belief that the Amazon once supported complex, large-scale societies was correct. The rainforest was not an untouched wilderness. It was a landscape shaped by human hands, and those civilizations had vanished long before Europeans arrived. Z, it seemed, was not a city. It was an idea, a symbolic placeholder for a lost chapter of human history. In this context, Fawcett's obsession appears less delusional and more prophetic. He lacked the tools modern researchers possess. He relied on observation, inference, and intuition, and while his conclusions were incomplete, they were not unfounded. Still, the question of his fate remains unanswered. No verified burial site has ever been located. No object has been recovered beyond reasonable doubt. Indigenous oral histories continue to offer multiple versions, none definitive. The Amazon does not preserve history the way ice does. It consumes it. Wood rots, metal corrodes, bones dissolve into acidic soil. Time erases quickly in the rainforest. Perhaps that is why the mystery endures. Fawcett's disappearance also reshaped how exploration was perceived. The romantic image of the lone explorer conquering unknown lands gave way to a more sober understanding. Some environments do not yield to ambition. They demand respect, or they erase you. In popular culture, the lost city of Z became a recurring symbol. Books, films, and documentaries reinterpreted the story, each adding layers of myth and speculation, but the core remained unchanged. A man walked into the forest believing he was close to something extraordinary and never returned. What separates Fawcett from countless other failed explorers is not how he vanished, but why he went. He was not chasing gold. He was not claiming territory. He was searching for evidence that history was larger than accepted narratives allowed. In that sense, his expedition succeeded, not through discovery, but through provocation. It forced future generations to look again, and they did. The Amazon is now recognized as one of the most archaeologically significant regions on Earth. Entire research programs exist to study its pre-Columbian societies. What was once dismissed as fantasy is now active science. Fawcett never lived to see that validation, but his disappearance became part of it. Some expeditions end in triumph, some end in disaster, and some end in silence. Percy Fawcett's final journey belongs to the last category. No final camp, no confirmed remains, no closure, only a name written into maps of the unknown, and the question that still echoes beneath the canopy. How much of human history vanished not because it never existed, but because it was forgotten? If stories like this matter to you, stories where ambition, history, and human limits collide, consider subscribing to the channel. New expeditions, real documents, and forgotten journeys are explored here every week. Thank you for staying with the story until the end. If you enjoyed this journey, consider subscribing to the channel. Each video explores a real expedition, a real mystery, and the thin line between discovery and disappearance. More stories like this are already waiting. Until the next expedition.